Good evening. Welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education regular meeting of February 28th, 2022. Tomorrow is March. We're making it through the winter. We welcome everyone everyone who's joining us today, either in person or online. At this time, Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Yes. Mrs. Acosta.
Here.
Mrs. Bonifield.
Here.
Mr. Centers.
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis is absent tonight. Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mrs. Bradford says here. President Burton.
Here, and we have a quorum. Mrs. Acosta, would you help us with the Pledge of Allegiance this evening?
Yes. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We welcome all of you, and if you'd like to have an agenda to follow along with this evening's activities, they can be found just outside the door to my left as you came in on the table. If you'd also like to participate with audience communications this evening, you can find a blue slip there. So if you could fill that out and get that passed down to Mrs. Acosta, she can get it over to me so you can be participating at the appropriate time. If you are following along from home and you'd like an agenda, they can be found on our website. That is livoniapublicschools.org. If you hover over the Board of Education tab, you can drop down to Board Information, and the agendas can be found under that tab. Under that same tab, you can also find videos of previous meetings. So if you'd like more details on the meetings that preceded or that lead up to this one, that's where you can find those. This evening's meeting is a regular meeting, or some call it a voting meeting or a general meeting. What we mean by this is that the items that are coming before the board this evening have been discussed typically at least 2 other meetings. Therefore, you may or may not see the level of discussion that you might expect before we vote on some of these items. Please understand that that is not because we are taking them lightly or we're not asking questions, but rather they were discussed in depth, typically at our Committee of the Whole meeting, which is the 1 week prior to a voting meeting. If you'd like to see more detail of those discussions, I do recommend, again, you go to that Board of Education tab, drop down to Board Information, and you can view the videos of those meetings. The Committee of the Whole meetings are where we have deep discussion about items before they come to this evening for votes. We're going to have a brief break in our meeting to congratulate those who are being honored this evening, and that will come right after item 3C on your agenda. So we'll have just a 5-minute or so recess in our meeting so that we can congratulate our honorees of the evening. Respect is one characteristic that we teach to our children in all levels of our school district. And you have our word that starts with this Board of Education. You have our word that we will treat one another and everyone who presents before this board with respect. In return, we ask that everybody who's in attendance this evening treat everybody else in this room with respect. We find that that is the best way to teach our children by example. We can agree, we can disagree, but that is how we are choosing to run these meetings, and we hope that you do the same. We have quite a full agenda with us this evening. We are going to move along. Our item 3 is communications, and the first item is our Principals Week resolution, and I welcome Mr. Dan Willenborg. We do. I'm sorry, can you hang on just a moment, Mr. Willenborg, and we are going to get a motion at the table for this. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mrs. Bonifield.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolution establishing the week of February 28, 2022 as Principals Week in Livonia Public Schools.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mr. Centers. Mr. Willenborg.
Thank you, President Burton and members of the board and Superintendent Oquist. This evening, we'd like to recognize a special group of educators within the Livonia Public Schools. The men and women of this special group are responsible for essentially everything that does or does not happen within their school buildings. Their name is usually signed at the bottom of any written communication sent to students and parents within their community. They are our district's leaders of learning and creators of culture. They possess a positive attitude and have a growth mindset. They provide a voice of reason and are charged to be proactive in their problem solving. They are a parent of progress, always vigilant regarding continuous improvement. This special group of educators are our school principals and administrative leaders. And why we call them principals or coordinators, their roles and duties include part policeman, fireman, mayor, and judge. They are part greeter, counselor, therapist, author, accountant, journalist, traffic officer, social media specialist, interior decorator, tutor, coach, professor, and preacher. They are charged as the human resource, the finance, and the operation directors of their building. They are the Secretary of State and the general of their schools who are never removed from the front lines. Our principals and administrative leaders take ownership in caring for our students and connecting them to their futures. Our principals and administrative leaders are a listening ear for students and staff and can be counted on for their professionalism and for their passionate belief of how education can transform a life and strengthen a nation. This evening, we are proud to kick off the LPS Principals Week with a special resolution that will be read into the record and affirmed by the Board of Education. I do believe it's Ms. Bonifield that'll join me at the podium. I'll read and present the resolution, and I'll request that Mr. Benjamin Hillard, the district's assessment coordinator and co-president of the Livonia Educational Administrators, join me front and center. Or to the side, I suppose.
Front is the side. That's my best place.
Principals Week Resolution. Whereas the Principals Week is dedicated to recognizing the significant contributions of Livonia Public Schools principals and the commitment to providing quality education, experiences, and guidance for their students, and whereas energetic and inspiring school leadership is essential if schools, teachers, and support staff are to implement college and career-ready standards and assessments, and whereas school principals play a vital role in the success of students and act as the liaison between the school and the community it serves. Whereas we join with educators, parents, and students to raise awareness of the importance of educational leadership, now there be it resolved that the trustees of the Livonia Public School Board of Education recognize the week of February 28, 2022 as School Principals Week. And this is for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Go.
All right. So, Mr. Willenberg, thank you first for that. And that was a great speech on our principals. They are leaders. They are, so many things that you were able to capture in there. That was amazing. They're also amazing people. Throughout the past 2 years, I think we've seen them all rise, take on challenges, and just a group that's willing to go at it and get what's needed for the kids done, and they've stepped up to everything. And they are an amazing group, so I'm honored to have this role to accept this recognition and to take this resolution for Principals Week. It is thank you to the entire board, cabinet, and not just for this week, but I feel like throughout the whole year, we appreciate the support that we're given from the board and from our cabinet team and all the administrators. So this week, it is an honor, and definitely thank you. But for the support throughout the entire year, we want to thank you as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions from the board or superintendent? Mrs. Okus?
Thank you so much, and I would certainly leave the remarks that Mr. Willenberg shared. I can't imagine any of us capturing in a better way the work that our leaders across this district do, both in our school and in our departments here at Central Office. That has been on no greater display than over the past 2 years. I hope they know how much we value them, how important they are to the children that we collectively serve. We are so very proud to stand beside them each and every day, and we thank them for their steadfast leadership.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions from members of the Board of Education? Mr. Willenberg, one of the things that you said is always the first thing that I think of when I think of our principals, and that is that they set the tone, the culture of the building. And that really to me, as a parent, permeates all of the rest. Not that it's more important or less than other attributes, but it is so palpable, the difference that the personalities that of a given principal make and bring to a building. And that is something that I've just always really appreciated in Livonia Public Schools. Each personality may be slightly different from one another, but the difference that individually they come in and set the tone of the culture of that building, and it makes such a difference to students and parents. And I absolutely believe staff also, but coming from the perspective of a parent in the building. It's just something that I so greatly appreciate about our building administrators.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments from the board? Alrighty. Congratulations again to all of our principals, and we, Mr. Hillard, on behalf of the board, thank you for being here this evening. We couldn't be prouder of the team that we have. We have a Principals Week resolution by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mr. Centers, and Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Bonifield.
Support.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
President Burton.
Yes, and the motion passes. Thank you so much, Mr. Willenberg.
Thank
you, Mr. Hiller, for being with us this evening. The next item on our agenda is the LPS Education Foundation, and I'm going to invite to the podium Mrs. Lorna Durand.
Good evening.
Good evening.
President Burton, board members, Superintendent Oquist. It's my pleasure to be here tonight to introduce Laura Ulasic, the new part-time executive director of the LPS Education Foundation. As you may be aware, the mission of the foundation is to enlarge the resources available to the school district, which will foster and expand educational opportunities for programs impacting students by building effective collaborations. Currently, our major programs are the Competitive Edge and the Grant Program. The Competitive Edge was initiated during the 2008-2009 school year. The foundation provides an opportunity for the family of each kindergarten student to set up an IRS Section 529 savings program for college. At no cost to the families, we deposit $100 for each student enrolled and add funds to each cohort class as the future budgets allow. In 2020, we awarded our first enrolled cohort group of 2008 their scholarship of $220. And then in 2021, we awarded the 2009 cohort group their scholarship of $245. The initial contribution and the disbursements grow due to the investments as well as the number of students enrolled in that cohort group. This program is possible through the generosity of our founding corporate partners, our corporate donors, individuals in the community, district employees, retirees, alumni, as well as the PTAs and PTSAs. The grant program began in 2013 and has awarded 162 grants for a total of $292,698.42 to district staff. The grant program is funded by staff payroll deductions, corporate donors, and community and individual donors. As the Board of Directors reviewed our goals and our programs, and we began to address the issue of sustainability, we began to discuss the possibility of hiring a part-time executive director to not only sustain our two programs, but also to look at increasing funding for future programs as well as addressing our mission. Last fall, we made the decision to hire a part-time executive director, and we began the recruitment and interview process. We had a number of very qualified candidates, and it's my honor tonight to introduce our choice, Mrs. Laura Ulasic. Laura began working on the board last month as our executive director. She was raised in Livonia, where she attended Livonia Public Schools preschool through 12th grade, graduating from Stevenson High School. She then went to major on, I'm trying to say this better, excuse me. She then went on to major in journalism at Michigan State University, graduating with a Bachelor of Arts as well as a specialization in dance. Laura and her husband, Mike, along with their 3 children, Andrew, Nathan, and Hannah, live in Livonia. Andrew and Nathan both recently graduated from Franklin High School, and Hannah attends Grant Elementary. To the foundation, Laura brings experience in marketing and public relations, typesetting and graphic design, fundraising, and more. But most importantly, she brings a passion for Livonia Public Schools. Laura's been very active in Livonia Public Schools PTAs and was the PTSA president at Franklin High School from 2008 to 2021. She's currently on the Livonia PTSA Council, which oversees the 22 local PTA and PTSA units, and serves as a monthly newsletter chairperson, as well as helping in many other functions. She previously taught dance through the LPS Community Education and served as coordinator of the dance program for many years before moving on to open her own studio in Livonia from 2006 to 2018. She is also part of the LPS Athletic Council, which is comprised of the high school principals, athletic director, and a parent representative from each high school. And you're going to see Laura at many functions at Franklin, the sporting events, and she primarily will be selling tickets often. Livonia Public Schools is a big part of Laura's life, and she's excited to be part of the foundation team and continue working to make an impact on the lives of the LPS students and staff. We have begun the process of introducing Laura to the community in just a variety of ways, and tonight is one of the ways we've chosen. And as I stated early, it is my pleasure to introduce Laura to you, the Board of Education, tonight, and to the community. Thank you very much, and Laura.
Thank you, and good evening. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm excited to join the Education Foundation team. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve Livonia Public Schools students, staff, and families through the foundation. One of my goals for the foundation is to make it more well-known using our social media and an upgraded website, which I hope to upgrade very soon, which will in turn bring more donations and will benefit our wonderful staff and students. My hope is that we'll be able to do more fundraisers this coming year, and one of the fundraisers that we'll be implementing soon is Star Awards. A Star Award will honor a Livonia Public Schools employee and who has made a difference in either a student, a family's, or a fellow staffer's life. It's a great way for the foundation to raise funds and for the community to show their support and appreciation for an LPS professional. These awards can honor any LPS employee, principals, teachers, food service workers, custodians, transportation, anything, or anyone. There will be a nomination form and a small fee, and then the nominated individual who is being honored will receive a certificate and have their picture taken. We will then post this on our social media and our website, and then we'll ask our wonderful Stacy Jenkins to share it to LPS's social media. Another goal is to become more active with our alumni by connecting with them on a regular basis, setting up alumni events, and inviting them to current LPS functions like plays and musicals, homecoming, sporting events, anything where we could get our alumni to come back. I am honored to serve the LPS community as part of the Education Foundation, and I look forward to all the great things that I know we can do. Thank you so much.
Laura, welcome. We are thrilled to have you. The Education Foundation has been such an enormous undertaking for so many volunteers for so many years, and we're happy that we're not losing our volunteers, but at a certain point, it demands really somebody who can dig in and make this a full-time, or a part-time job rather. I know our volunteers have really filled that role for a long time, but at a certain point, it's just benefits the longevity to have someone come in who can really make this part of their daily life. Our volunteers in the past, I know I'm thinking of several individually have done that, and we're just grateful that we're at a point right now that we can actually hire someone to take on a lot of those responsibilities. We are thrilled to have you join us. Did I hear correctly that you've been the president of the Franklin PTA for how many years?
From 2018 to 2021.
Wow, that's a stretch.
It was 3 years.
Yep. Wow. Are there comments or questions from our superintendent or other members of the Board of Education?
Congratulations.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mrs. Okus?
I'll just mention I've enjoyed working with Laura prior to her coming into this role, and I know the foundation did a lot of work to make a selection of just the right person. The foundation was at a point where they were able to move forward in this direction, and we're so grateful for the continued never-ending right hand that you play in the roles of our students, of our staff. The programs that you talked about, Lorna, are really hallmarks as part of the school district, thanks to the foundation. So, Laura, we're thrilled to have you on board in this role, and we know you'll continue to make a difference, just as you have in each and every school with which you've been a part. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
At this time, we are on to our district update from the superintendent, after which we'll take a brief break to congratulate our honorees this evening, and I'll turn the meeting over to Mrs. Oquist.
Okay, thank you so much. President Burton will share some highlights from the past couple of weeks. I'll bring your attention up to one of the screens in the room. As you know, we've had the opportunity to be part of the Be Kind Livonia initiative. We've talked about it here a few times. It emanated out of Rosedale Gardens Presbyterian Church and really has been a community effort. You see some pictures here and over the next couple of slides that really share the recipients of the pizza lunches, the blessing bags that came from a combined effort from the City of Livonia, Rosedale Gardens Church, Police and Fire, St. Mary Mercy Hospital, the Chamber of Commerce, and Livonia Public Schools and Clarenceville Public Schools. So in the past, they have highlighted special groups such as our first responders at St. Mary Mercy, our Livonia Fire, and our Livonia Police, all groups who truly are servants within our community. And we were so proud to be asked this year to participate and to have every staff member within LPS and Clarenceville be recognized in this way. So we had our final gathering last week. The last three were on Friday. And we just want to thank everyone involved for their support, including the LPS Foundation. Last week, I know a number of us were able to attend the Livonia Chamber of Commerce Leadership and Awards Banquet. So you'll see on the left two very impressive youth. If you were there, I think you join me in saying we're not sure how they have time to eat and sleep. Besides the tremendous work that they do within their schools, they do that and more in their community. So we were so proud to see both Harish and Ovia both be recognized by the Livonia Chamber of Commerce as the city's outstanding youth for their volunteer efforts. We were also so pleased that they continue to recognize our Educators of the Year and Support Staff of the Year. So we want to thank the Chamber for that opportunity to celebrate folks within Livonia Public Schools, and then we also had the opportunity to see so many others as well, large and small businesses recognized, etc. You might have noticed on social media that our schools had a lot of fun with February 22nd, 2022. So it was Tuesday, and if you had a chance to see on social media, we really enjoyed seeing the classes highlight ties, tutus, and more. So lots of students and staff dressed as twins, and the picture in the center was taken at Hayes Elementary at 2:22 p.m. in the afternoon, if you can only imagine. We also hit the 100th day of school, and so our students have aged quickly, as you can see by their walkers and gray hair. It was great. That's always a big day. I remember being in as a teacher and a principal of the elementary schools, and I'll tell you, hitting the 100th day of school and what a celebration that was with the students. So I know a lot of our schools had a great time with that, and we'd love to share that with you. We've shared many times our pride in the work of the Livonia Transition Program, and I see these pictures are overlapping a bit, but we have a couple of our proud students there who make baked goods for the Ward Church Cafe. It has been just an ongoing, amazing partnership. They make some delicious goodies, so if you have a chance to stop by, I know they'd love to see you, and we continue to be so proud of the work that is done in our Livonia Transition Program. So we're going to share some successes. You might see a familiar face there, SHS Athletic Director Lori Hyman. She has recently been selected for the MHSAA 2022 Women in Sports Leadership Award. She will be honored at the girls' basketball finals at the Breslin Center on March 19th. Ms. Hyman was the 78-79 team captain on the MSU basketball team. And as you know, she has been a tremendous leader and athletic director for many, many years at Stevenson High School, was a graduate of Stevenson, and an amazing athlete. So what an honor for her to be selected out of all the women in leadership in the state by the MHSAA. So we are very proud of her and proud to have her as part of our leadership team. So we had some state champs. They have just been on fire. We want to congratulate the Franklin High School Pom-Pom team for placing first in Division I in the state. This is a first for Franklin High School. They have every right to be extremely proud. It is a very, very competitive event, and we are so proud of their efforts. We also had, I think we have another team that we're gonna share in just a moment. So this past weekend, Kappa performed Les Miserables. Did I say that properly?
That was
Okay. So really just kudos to the students in our Kappa program and to their teachers and coaches for the wonderful performances this weekend. As you know, each one of those is truly a labor of love to put on and takes many, many hours of work, not only for those on the stage, but for all those around the stage, behind the stage, in the light booth to make these performances happen. So congratulations to them. We want to recognize 5 individuals. They were 5 of our students were out of 120 finalists, which originally came out of over 1,400 applicants across the state for Scholar Athlete of the Year. And so it is relatively unusual to have, even 1 or 2, but to have 5 come out of our high schools, come out of our district, out of those 120 is pretty remarkable. So I'd like to share that Abigail Lewick from Livonia Churchill, Samantha Provenzano from Livonia Franklin, Erica Molnar from Livonia Stevenson, Owen Swisher from Livonia Churchill, and James Oberman from Livonia Franklin. So they have to meet a certain criteria, also have lettered in at least one sport, and oftentimes more than that. And so these folks were finalists for those awards, and we are just so very proud of their efforts. And here's another wonderful team from Churchill High School. They placed first in Division II at the state championship earlier this month as well. So those smiles tell the story. All of their hard work has come to fruition as well. Livonia Red has been undefeated. If you have been following their work this year, we'd like to congratulate them on being KLAA Gold Division champs and KLAA Conference champs for the second year in a row. So they continue their undefeated season, and they are headed into regionals. So we wish them luck and are so very proud of their efforts. And another great group. This is becoming a familiar pattern to see Franklin Bowling at the top of their game and rolling right along. Okay, I just wanted to make sure you were still with me. Just wanted to make sure. So they won the Division I Region 5 championships and earned that beautiful trophy there. So congratulations to them, and they will continue in their tournament season. We're so excited to recognize, and I'm going to have to, this is a little smaller, so I'm going to pull this up on my own screen. We wanted to recognize Frost musicians who are truly ready to impress. So on the left, you will see 9 band students who have been selected to perform at Orchestra Hall in Detroit for the Detroit Symphony Orchestra Middle School Honors Day. A tremendous honor and a very, very talented group of individuals there. On the right, you'll see 16 orchestra students who have been selected to perform at Orchestra Hall in Detroit for the day, also for the Detroit Symphony, and they are performing on Middle School Honors Day. So how tremendous to have so many students from one of our middle schools. As you know, our music teachers and the students in those programs are tireless in their efforts to practice and perform, and we are so excited for this opportunity for them. Speaking of musicians, the Stevenson High School Music Department hosted a mini Michigan School Vocal Music Association District Solo and Ensemble Festival. This was a few weeks ago. We had the Women's Ensemble, the Village Singers, the Nightingales, and Select Choir. So the following soloists competed as well: Macy Barr, Isabel Greenway, Ashlyn Weiland, and Kate Stromberg. So congratulations to those who are advancing to the State Solo and Ensemble Festival. We have some talented kiddos, don't we? I'll tell you, they just blow us away. I've shared this previously, but as you know, we can't wait to welcome the class of 2035. The registrations are rolling in. We have over 500 students already registered for next year. It's great to see them coming in and getting ready to get started. So a couple quick reminders. As you know, last year we switched to a community hub. So instead of getting a lot of backpack mail or mail via email, all of the flyers that parents might be interested in for activities for their students are now housed on the community hub. That's on the front page of the district website. So a lot of youth-oriented organizations will send us things. Mrs. Jenkins puts them all there. It's one great place to find that. So just a reminder to families, if you're looking for any type of activity for your child, please check there and check back often, because it regularly gets updated. And as always, we like to remind you that the LPS Social Emotional Hotline, thanks to Dr. Terriel and her entire student services crew, is always manned 24/7. So there's a phone number, there's an internal extension for anyone who's within our schools, and then also a website. And then finally, we are still hiring. So if you would like to join us in food service, transportation, or school-age childcare, please reach out. So thank you so much, President Burton. It's great to share just some sights and sounds from around LPS.
The most fun thing about our regular meetings is the first section, when we can celebrate so many exciting things that are going on in our school district. We are going to be taking a brief recess, about 5 or 10 minutes or so right now, so that those who are in attendance this evening can congratulate our honorees. Then we will be back with the continuation of our meeting. So we are right now at recess. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the continuation of the regular meeting of Livonia Public Schools Board of Education, February 28th, 2022. At this point of our agenda, we are on to written communications. Do any board members have written communications that they need to share with the other board members? Seeing none, we are on to response to prior audience communications. The most recent prior audience communications have been requests that we consider not requiring masks in our school district. As we have said for many, many months now, that is not a decision that was up to the school district, but rather the Wayne County Health Department. Since our last general meeting, the Wayne County Health Department has lifted that restriction, and therefore Livonia Public Schools has also lifted that restriction. As recently as last Friday afternoon, after school was out, so that made a special weekend for our administrators. Thank you. We got word from the Federal Department of Transportation that masks were no longer required on our buses either. So therefore, over the weekend, our administrators quickly put communication together and got that out to our families so that they would know that masks are also a choice for families on our school buses and in addition to our school buildings at this time. They will continue to be made available for anyone who wishes to have one who is in need, and it's up to each family and each student and each staff member what they choose to do with that decision. We are very happy that gets to be a decision of families and that we can offer that as a choice to families and still be within the law, which is what we have needed to be with it throughout this entire process. The next item on our agenda is audience communications. I do not have any blue slips. Is there anybody present this evening who wishes to participate in audience communications? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. Next item is item 4, our consent agenda, and may I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mr. Johnson.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of January 24, 2022. 5B, minutes of the special meeting of February 7, 2022. 5C, minutes of the closed session of February 7, 2022. 5D, minutes of the special meeting of February 21, 2022. And 5E, minutes of the closed session of February 21, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mr. Centers. Are there any items that any board member wishes to have removed from the consent agenda for voting later in the meeting? No. Seeing none, we have a motion for the consent agenda by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mr. Centers. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
President Burton.
Yes, and that motion passes. We are now on to item 6, business matters. Bear with me for just a moment here. Item 6A is the approval of the summer 2022 boiler projects sinking fund. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mr. Centers.
Oh, excuse me 1 second. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase and installation of new boilers at Churchill High School, Stevenson High School, Buchanan Elementary, Livonia Career Technical Center, Cleveland Elementary, Randolph Elementary, Jackson Early Childhood Center, and the Churchill Swimming Pool Boiler from Engineered Comfort Systems, Inc., Taylor, Michigan, for a total cost of $2,044,307.54, including a contingency of 8%.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And I believe we'll be hearing from Mr. Francis on this item.
Yes, thank you, President Burton. Currently, the district is in process of continuing to implement our 10-year facilities plan, and this is a sinking fund project that we have been doing over the past handful of years. I think it's become pretty familiar with the board and those in the community. They hear us around this time each year coming with this recommendation. One of the things I just want to point out, Churchill is in their choice. We tried to make sure that that was pretty clear in the resolution, what was going on. And just to give folks a little background, the boiler for the pool at Churchill High School unexpectedly malfunctioned. There was a leak. It ruined it to the point where looking for parts and paying for parts to replace a 10-year-old, I think it's even a little bit more than that, boiler didn't make sense. So we went ahead and replaced it and put it into this bid pack. So generally, our boiler project that is that part of the 10-year facility plan is the boilers that work to heat the building in the winter, but this is a boiler that heats the pool, and it made sense just to put it into that same package. So that's where that's coming from. Again, this is a summer 2022 project that will be occurring, and with regard to the pool at Churchill, for those wondering, we were in contact with the athletic director, who actually is the person who pointed out to us that it had occurred right away, and the principal, and they do know, and the school has known for a bit, that the pool is not being usable for the remainder of the school year. They made their adjustments at the building, both from a class standpoint as well as an athletics department standpoint. So we do recommend to you Engineered Comfort Systems as the vendor for this project, and we worked with them last year.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions from board members? Mr. Centers?
I know that we're replacing these because of end of life and usefulness, but can you talk about how we have seen also efficiencies from this?
I appreciate that, Mr. Centers, because I think we've been doing this for a while. We forget that this is a pretty big energy savings and cost savings, simply replacing the older traditional boilers that we have, which were using millions of BTUs more than what the current new boiler system that's going in. It's smaller, it's more efficient, uses less energy, both from a gas standpoint, natural gas standpoint, as well as electricity. So I do appreciate that. You brought that up. I apologize. I sort of have it built in now that, yes, these are great. They're energy efficient. They cost us less, and we use less energy overall in our footprint. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the board? This is the first of several items, as we mentioned earlier, that we had extensive discussion about at previous meetings, so we'll probably have more succinct discussion than you may expect. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we have the approval of summer 2022 boiler projects sinking fund. Motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 6B, approval of maintenance equipment purchase 2021 bond. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton?
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of forklifts and their related accessories from Morrison Industrial Equipment Company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, for a total cost of $124,606.48.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mr. Johnson. Mr. Francis.
Thank you again. This purchase of forklifts, we're actually going to be getting, these are for the warehouse. For those who don't know, Livonia Public Schools has its own warehouse. We have warehouse staff in there. The forklifts that they're currently using are about 30 years old. They've gone through quite a bit of their useful life, but we do plan to keep a couple of them, one of them I should say, for the transportation department, the traditional forklift, what we used to call high-low quite often, you'll know those as. The other two are electric reach trucks. That's an item that in the warehouse going up on a higher shelf, and then it can push out, grab the item, the pallet that we have stored, pull it out, bring it back down. So we're getting two of those and one of the traditional high-lows. The accessories mentioned, we are getting 2 batteries for the electric lift trucks and 1 charger. So those are the accessories that go with this. These come from the My Deals consortium, so the board's requirement for bid has been satisfied.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or members of the board? Seeing none, we have a motion for approval of maintenance equipment purchase 2021 bond. Motion by Mrs. Bradford and supported by Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Bradford, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is the approval of greenhouse at Garfield Community School amended motion. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase and installation of a greenhouse at Garfield Community School from Clearspan in Glastonbury, Connecticut, for a cost of $133,177.61, plus a contingency of $6,700.
I don't, is your mic on? Your mic's on. Sorry.
Sorry, we had a mic
It's
issue.
far from me. They're both far. Here, I'll do double. Do you want, I'll start over.
Let's start again.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it looks like we were having a little bit of technical issues.
Okay.
Let's start at the beginning.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase and installation of a greenhouse at Garfield Community School from Clearspan in Glastonbury, Connecticut, for a cost of $133,177.61, plus a contingency of $6,700, for a total project cost of $139,877.61.
Support.
And
Wait, you're not-
authorize the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contracts on behalf of the Board of Education. This motion supersedes and replaces the board motion from May 17, 2021.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. Mr. Francis.
Yes, thank you, President Burton. As mentioned in the resolution, this was originally from May 17th, 2021. The board had read into the record and approved this at the time. There was a mix-up in the company. Everything on there was the same, the dollar amounts, et cetera. We had, that I had shared with the board, the original quotes. There were two names on there. There's a Grosspan, there's a Clearspan with a couple of different home addresses, both in Connecticut. And it turns out the company that we actually have the invoice from, that we actually have to pay, is Clearspan and not Grosspan. Grosspan was a subsidiary of sorts. So this is nothing more than getting the appropriate resolution with the appropriate company's name into the record. And the board did approve this back in May of '21. We actually have the greenhouse in our possession, and we're continuing to work on that project. So I recommend approving this because we've already bought it, or we have already got it. We haven't paid for it though, and we can't until we have the proper resolution read into the record.
Got it, thank you. Any comments or questions from the superintendent or the board? Mrs. Acosta.
I'll just mention, and I know Mr. Francis has explained this both at the study session and at the committee of the whole session, but when the team looked at this, I believe both, they're part of the same company. And as you saw, the materials, some said Grosspan, some said Clearspan. And so what got put on the bid pack from our team as they read through that went with the flyer that had attached, but then the invoice came from the parent company. So these are both part of the same company. But in order to just be very clear so that the payment matches the motion, we thought it was most prudent to bring it forward again.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members of the board? Seeing none, we have the approval of, the approval of greenhouse at Garfield Community School amended, motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. Mrs. Bradford, will you take the roll?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is the approval of tractors 2021 bond amended. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Bonnefield.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District authorize the purchase of 12 John Deere X580 tractors with front blades and mowing decks from John Deere for a total cost of $653.12. This board motion supersedes and replaces the board motion from January 24, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mr. Johnson. Mr. Francis?
Well, since I made one mistake on the last one, we decided to put them both together, and we've talked about this. It was a typographical error, and it was missed by a few different folks. The only change from last month when the board had read into and approved this purchase was the 88,653 and 12 cents was typed in as 88,553 and 12 cents. It did slip past a few folks. I apologize for that. And we're just bringing it back because that $100 now is technically short because the board approved $100 less last month. So we're just trying to get the number correct so we can follow through on this purchase.
Alrighty. Any comments or questions from the superintendent or board members? Seeing none, we have a motion for approval of tractors 2021 bond amended. Motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Bradford, will you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
President Burton.
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 7, instruction matters, and it's 7A is limited out-of-district schools of choice for 2022-2023. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mr. Johnson.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent to participate in limited schools of choice under Section 105 and 105C for the 2022-2023 school year. Openings to include no more than 185 seats in kindergarten through 8th grade and 5 seats in each global ed and Kappa at 9th grade only, for a total of up to 195 students.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Acosta. And we will hear from Mr. Green and Mr. Willenborg on this.
Good evening. Thank you to the Board of Education for your time listening and asking questions the past few weeks at our study session and Committee of the Whole meeting regarding limited schools of choice. As we discussed, the Limited Schools of Choice program has been utilized to offset our declining enrollment, stabilize class size in various locations, and increase our revenue since the 14-15 school year. Per the recommendation, we are here to offer up to 195 total seats through the Limited Schools of Choice program. In K-8, that would be 185 seats, and then both Kappa and Global Education would have up to 5 seats available for incoming freshmen. This recommendation mirrors what we implemented this current school year. If approved, the application window for next year will begin tomorrow, March 1st, 2022, and run through March 30th, 2022 till 4 p.m. And those timelines for limited schools of choice would be published on our district's website effective tomorrow morning.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments from the superintendent or Board of Education members? Just like to point out that these spots are spots that have not been taken by Livonia Public Schools residential students. Mr. Green or Mr. Willenborg, either one of you, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but LPS students have the opportunity for any of these spots first, and specifically for the Kappa and the Global Ed programs. Those are on an application or a tryout basis, and these are spots that have not been taken by Livonia Public Schools students. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And can you address, Mr. Green, for us, the placement of students in the general education programs for these spots?
Absolutely. As we start doing our enrollment sweeps each spring, we analyze where we would have pockets of available seats at various buildings. And as such, once we have our lottery in April, we would then assign students to those available spots in our buildings, maintaining some of our core fundamental principles, such as we would not increase class size beyond the averages in those buildings. But if we analyze that data and see there are 3 or 4 spots available in a certain location, we would then target those buildings or those grade levels at such buildings for those placements of our limited schools choice students. And then, once approved, those limited school of choice students would follow that triad path up through their graduation.
Okay. One of the benefits, as I understand it also, is this reduces the chances for split classes in some of our elementary schools, which are frequently not popular with parents or students when that has to happen. And if I understand correctly, this has greatly reduced split classes in our elementaries.
That is correct. I appreciate Ms. Bonifield last week mentioning some other benefits of the limited school of choice program, and this would be one such benefit.
Okay. And we're approving right now up to 195 slots. Typically, we actually wind up enrolling about 60%-ish of the approved number once all is said and done. Is that correct?
That's what our data shows for the last several years, yes.
Okay, alrighty. I'm definitely in support of this program that we've had now for the last many years. If it fills some pockets of funding and it fills some empty available seats in Livonia Public Schools without diminishing any of the programs that we can offer. As a matter of fact, it helps us keep some of our programming that might have too few students, and if we could subsidize it with a few others, it helps us keep some of our programs available for Livonia Public Schools. So I see this as definitely a win-win. Are there any other comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, we have the limited out-of-district schools of choice for 2022-2023. Motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Acosta. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. President Burton?
Yes. And that motion passes. Thank you to Mr. Green and Mr. Willenborg on that item. Our next item is the approval to purchase everyday mathematics journals. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mr. Centers.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of everyday math student journals for first through fourth grade classes and updated teacher resources from McGraw-Hill Education at a total cost of $258,545.40, which includes shipping and handling. This purchase is for this purchase is for 3 school years, beginning with the 2022-23 school year, and includes $172,990.50 in free teacher materials and student journals.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Bradford. Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you, President Burton. This purchase is a 3-year purchase for our consumable everyday math journals. We have been using the everyday math program, the 2016 publication date, since 2016. These journals we use in 1st through 4th grade. In kindergarten, we create our own journal based on the number of units that they teach out of the everyday math. And then the teacher resources would be for kindergarten through 4th grade teachers. So 3 years of their platform for teachers and a hardcover teacher guide book, so they would have the book and access to the electronic teacher platform. And we are not purchasing at this time 5th and 6th grade because we are currently looking at a different textbook for 5th and 6th grade.
Okay. Are there questions or comments on this item from the superintendent or board members? Seeing none, we have a motion for for approval to purchase everyday mathematics journals. A motion by Mr. Centers and supported by Mrs. Bradford. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 8, personnel matters, and 8A is teachers for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton?
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 2021-22 school year to the teachers listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mr. Centers. We'll be hearing from Mr. Abate.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
The new staff members we are presenting to the board this evening include a learning specialist, as well as teachers to fill needs in foreign language, secondary science, and ELA. They are all well qualified to fill these positions and have been fully vetted through our extensive interview process. We are confident they will perform at a high level and represent Livonia Public Schools in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. These positions have also been included in the 2021-2022 budget. We are pleased to be recommending these talented professionals to join our LPS family, and with your approval, we are excited to have them working with our students.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or board members?
Welcome aboard.
Absolutely. Mr. Abate, being in the middle of the school year, are these positions that we're filling due to retirements or leaves of absence, or what's the situation? I mean, on the whole, not specific, not individually.
We had a few folks take positions elsewhere, and that's largely what the secondary teaching needs are.
Okay, sounds good. We have a motion then.
And there was retirement in there actually as well. Sorry, pardon me, didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
Wanna make
As
sure
long
I'm
as I
clear.
know we're replacing folks that we had already budgeted. You mentioned that was already in the
Yes.
budget.
Yep.
But we're replacing folks that started in the beginning of the year, and we're replacing mid-year.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion for teachers of approval. Motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mr. Centers. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 8B, Teachers for Tenure. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mrs. Acosta.
Both mics. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and acknowledge that tenure status has been granted to the following teachers effective on the respective dates. Kristen Banter, February 17th, 2022. Bethany Voss, February 10th, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mr. Centers. Mrs. Keats. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Our Teachers for Tenure on this agenda have successfully completed the district's requirements for probationary teachers, including years of service, evaluations, overall performance, and documentation of student growth. We have carefully reviewed all supporting materials along with the recommendations of our building administration and have verified that these educators should be granted tenure status with the Livonia Public Schools. We wish to congratulate these staff members for reaching this milestone and look forward to their continued success working in LPS.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the board members or superintendent?
Congratulations.
Yep, absolutely. It's a wonderful milestone for them. At this time, we have a motion for Teachers for Tenure. Motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mr. Centers. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. At this time, we have a motion, or next item on our agenda, rather, is for a leave of absence. And may I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and approve the request for a leave of absence as listed below. Haley Skelly, May 18, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mr. Centers. And, hold on for a moment here. We'll be hearing from Mr. Abate on this one.
Yes. So as noted, the staff member in question has requested a leave for the remainder of the 21-22 school year from LPS. The request is in accordance with the collective bargaining agreement for this particular staff member's unit, and we ask that you please consider the approval of their leave time.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, we have a motion for a leave of absence by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mr. Centers. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is resignations, and that's not an item upon which the board needs to vote. It's just an information item. The next item will be retirements. Ever so bittersweet. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mr. Johnson.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation for the services rendered by David Gluth, Ronald Hamey, Cynthia Kaptanowski, Elizabeth Keeshian, and Paula Reef.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And we will hear from Mrs. Keats.
Good evening again. Tonight we honor and congratulate 5 members of our LPS family who are retiring from their positions with Livonia Public Schools. As these staff members leave the district, they take with them a combined total of 123 years of service. On behalf of the administration, I would like to thank these wonderful staff members for the dedicated years of service they have provided to the students of LPS. We ask the board to please adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation for our retirees.
Thank you. Do we have comments or questions from the superintendent or the Board of Education members?
Congratulations.
Yeah, always so hard to see our wonderful colleagues go, and we wish them the very, very best on their next part of their journey.
Absolutely. It's as we've said, it's with such mixed emotions. Nearly every time we look at a list of our retirees, there are folks that we know personally and that we've had the honor to work with personally, as not only board members but frequently as parents in these buildings. And these folks have just given such an incredible value to the lives of our students and the teams in which they work. It's going to be very, very difficult to vote yes on these items. If we vote no, will they just stay? Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, we've come close to trying it on some, and it never has worked. We do, though, as Mrs. Oquist said, we do wish you the very, very best in the next chapter of your lives, and we will miss you dearly. We have a motion right now for retirements. Motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Bonifield.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
President Burton.
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 9, hearing from board members, and 9A is the superintendent annual evaluation. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the evaluation of Superintendent Andrea Oquist, completed on February 21st, 2022, utilizing the MASB Superintendent Evaluation Tool, for which she received a rating of highly effective.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Acosta. It is our honor to do the superintendent evaluation for Mrs. Andrea Oquist, our superintendent. I'm thrilled and not the least bit surprised that her evaluation produced a highly effective rating. Are there board members who would like to speak to this first, and then I'll have a few comments. Mr. Centers.
Yeah, I just want to thank Mrs. Oquist for this is a very, very tough time to be school superintendents. There are fewer people wanting these jobs, and I think the last couple of years has shown how valuable the position is, but how difficult it is. So we are very fortunate to have you here in Livonia. You've always received highly effective ratings, and that's because you perform your job at such a high level. So, congratulations, and thank you for your continued work.
Are there other board members who would like to make any comments? Mrs. Bradford.
I too want to congratulate Mrs. Oquist for her years of service and her continued support of LPS. And like Dan said, what a kind of a rougher year this year, but you always see Mrs. Oquist at every event. I don't know how she gets there, or most events, but she is always around in the district whenever you wherever you go, to any event. And our families are really fortunate to have such a great superintendent in our district. We're really, really fortunate. So it's not a surprise that you received a rating of highly effective, and thank you for all you do for the district.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
I would like to say I am so pleased to be able to bring this forward and with a rating of highly effective. I think Superintendent Oquist leads by example. She works very hard, and she surrounds herself with people who follow her lead. And when you lead by example, I think it creates that atmosphere that just, we get a lot of work done, and with her leadership, it's a great group of people all around, and just top notch. And I just appreciate her leadership and the time she spends and the effort and everything that she does.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Burton. We were so fortunate a few years back when you were willing to move from your interim title to taking on the job permanently. I think it was at a time when you weren't quite sure what you wanted to do, but you made us very happy when you decided to go ahead and take the job permanently. We've seen you grow in the position. You hit the ground running. As some of the other board members have said, you are seen everywhere. I really think you have some clones out there because I don't know how you do it. It certainly is no surprise that you are highly effective. You have always been highly effective, and we only see great things on the horizon for you. So thank you so much for everything you do.
Any other comments? Mrs. Acosta?
Pretty much everything's been said, but I just wanted to say that as a parent in the district that it's always a commentary that you are approachable, because parents see you in the community and being a part of the community. And so I'm grateful. Having attended a lot of MESB events in the past year, I can say that it's one of those eye-opening moments, and we truly are grateful for all the work that you do for our district.
Any other comments? The position of superintendent is a really unique one because most people think of it as an education leader, which it absolutely is. But the superintendent really needs to be obviously a leader and steeped in education, but also steeped in how to run a 2,000 employee organization with 14,000 or nearly 14,000 students. We are, to my knowledge, the second largest employer in the city of Livonia. It's an enormous undertaking. We have a 150 or give or take $1 million budget. This is no small organization. So in addition to being very steeped in education, which clearly you are, coming from before being a teacher even in the district, and up to the teacher, principal, director of elementary education, and then to the superintendent position, you know this district inside and out. But in addition to the education knowledge, business knowledge, superintendent in the state of Michigan at least has also got to be very, very adept at working the legislative process in order to assure that we have proper funding for our school district. It is very, very rare to find an individual who can excel in all three of those areas, but that's what the job of superintendent really requires. In addition to the other roles that my colleagues have mentioned, those are three key areas, and it is very, very difficult to find someone who is so strong in all three of those areas. We are very blessed to have you as our superintendent. We are one of the top 10 districts in Michigan in terms of size. This is no small job. We have had, the last couple of years have been very unusual for every entity, education or not. But we are enormously proud that you have led the Livonia Public Schools in getting our children back into school so quickly through the coronavirus pandemic. not only have you done that, but you are truly a leader among leaders, because we know, the community may not, but we know that other superintendents in our surrounding area, many of them began calling you throughout the year after our kids were already in school. And you got a flood of calls last March when it was ordered that students go back to school, with superintendents calling to ask you, how did you do that? Well, you did it because you started us off the previous June. And you assembled a team of 250 people in our district to deeply, deeply dive into what are we going to need in every aspect of our school day in order to get our kids back to school, in order to get our employees back to school, and make sure everyone is safe and productive in doing so. You are a leader among leaders, and we are very, very blessed to have you. It's not the least bit surprising that you were highly effective, and I believe that if there was a higher rating that this board could give you, we would. Any other comments or questions? Seeing no others, we have a motion for superintendent evaluation. Motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Acosta. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Yes. Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
President Burton.
Yes. And that motion passes.
I just want to make a comment. One, I'm humbled by your remarks, and I appreciated all of the time you took to work through the MASB rubric in the evaluation process. It's a continuous growth process, and I would be remiss if I did not have the opportunity to recognize this team to my right. So our cabinet team works tirelessly, and we are all part of one. And each and every day, they show up in big, big ways. And we are all grateful for that. There is so much behind the scenes that people do not see. And these 9 individuals are truly a team I could not do without. So I am so grateful for them, and I am so grateful for my small viewing audience from home as well. I don't mean the viewing audience in general. I mean my immediate family. So thank you so much to both of those great teams. I would not be here without it. As you know, I'm a proud member of this community since I was born, and a proud parent of 2 LPS graduates. There is nowhere I would rather be. And without question, and also I'd like to thank this lovely individual to my right, Mrs. Wozniak, who, as you know, works miracles not only in our office, but on behalf of the board as well. So continuously by my side. Again, so grateful to be surrounded by this team each and every day, and the opportunity to work with all of you. Thank you.
Absolutely. One of the pieces of your superintendency is when we look over the past, and several of us as board members have talked about this, when we look over the last 6 to 8 years, our cabinet team had many different individuals on it. And through folks moving on to positions in the county and the state levels in education, which speaks a lot for Livonia Public Schools, I think, and some that have gone on to retire, we have our cabinet team looks different today than it did even 6 or 8 years ago. But one of the wonderful things is that you invest a lot of time in our cabinet, not only selecting such phenomenal individuals, but then leading and allowing each to grow in their new roles as cabinet members. And it is seen, and it's vital if we're going to make sure that our district can weather retirements, which we never like to see happen, but people do move on to other positions in their lives. But that is one thing that we love about your superintendency, is you've continued to keep this cabinet team vital and strong and growing. And that's exciting for us to see. If you had told me, if you had told me 8 years ago that our cabinet would look vastly different and so many vital people would no longer be there, I would have had a heart attack. And others have said the same thing, but yet each comes and goes one at a time. But with your leadership, it's just exciting now to see new people come onto the cabinet team and see each one grow into different roles and and developed into such vital roles of this organization. But it's,
Every once in a while, we need to let someone retire, as much as
Yeah.
we'd like to say no.
we've tried to say no. It didn't work. Alrighty. The next item on our agenda is, oh, I'm sorry, did we?
No, we voted.
We did vote, we're good.
Yeah, we're
Okay,
good.
all right, good. The next item on our agenda is item B, approval of resolution in support of the IDEA Full Funding Act. May I have a motion, please?
President Byrd,
Mr. Centers.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolution in support of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, fully funding, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Full Funding Act, which authorizes a 10-year plan to fully fund the federal share of IDEA.
Support.
And Mr. Centers, for the benefit of our folks who are listening from home and in our audience this evening, can you read the resolution for us?
Sure. Resolution in support of the IDEA Full Funding Act. Whereas Livonia Public Schools School District recognizes the need for a strong investment in the students served by Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and whereas the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was first enacted in 1975 to help ensure that all students with disabilities will have access to a free, appropriate public education. And whereas, with the enactment of IDEA, the United States Congress committed to fund up to 40% of the additional cost of special education, thereby promising to provide up to 40% of the national average per pupil expenditure, which is currently estimated at $13,828 per student by the U.S. Department of Education. And whereas, since IDEA's enactment more than 45 years ago, the current federal investment in IDEA is less than 14%, and our district is currently contributing $10 million annually from the general fund to cover unreimbursed costs related to the special education program. And whereas the Livonia Public Schools School District and many other public school districts throughout the United States educate a growing number of children with disabilities, which is now more than 7 million. And whereas our nation's school districts face an increased demand for greater resources to fulfill the needs of students under IDEA, including those students affected by multiple disabilities whose individual education plans require more resources. And be it resolved that the Livonia Public Schools School Board supports the IDEA Full Funding Act that will help strengthen the federal investment in special education by authorizing a 10-year plan to fully fund the federal share of IDEA, and urges Congress's strong support for passage of IDEA Full Funding Act. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Livonia Public Schools School Board remains committed to providing students with disabilities and their families the supports they need, and acknowledges the partnership among the local, state, and federal levels of government, which is critical to the shared investment in our children.
Thank you, Mr. Centers. Just a moment here. And at this point, we're going to hear from Mrs. Oquist on this item.
Thank you so much, President Burton, and thank you, Mr. Centers, for reading through that. As you know, we are very proud of the extensive services provided to our students with special needs throughout the district. That remains a firm commitment of Livonia Public Schools and throughout all of our providers and the leadership in our Student Services Department. This continues to be truly a point of pride at the district's ability to meet the needs of the children entrusted to us. We are collectively, with many, many other districts across the state of Michigan and indeed across the country, urging the full funding of the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. As you know, and as the resolution states, we contribute over $10 million annually from the general fund to cover those unreimbursed costs related to the special education program. We do that very, very willingly in order to ensure that our children have what they need. But we are supporting the IDEA Full Funding Act, and we appreciate the board's consideration of this resolution.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions by board members? Seeing none, we have the motion for the approval of resolution in support of the IDEA Full Funding Act. Motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mr. Johnson. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Bonifield?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is the selection of candidate for MASB Board of Directors. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mrs. Acosta.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District designate Dr. Darlene Pomponio as the Region 8 candidate for the MASB Board of Directors and direct the Executive Assistant of the Board of Education to cast the vote accordingly.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bonifield. Whenever there is a seat open on the MASB Board of Directors, each one of the school districts that are members votes on an individual to take this seat. There were several very qualified individuals who presented themselves to our school district. The individual that our board has discussed at the study session and the committee of the whole prior to this meeting, who stood out to us, is the incumbent candidate, which is Dr. Darlene Pomponio. She has served school boards through her own district and through MASB for many years now. She is very thorough. She is timely. She's very knowledgeable about school districts, and we see it appropriate that our vote go to Dr. Darlene Pomponio for this seat. Are there any other comments or questions from board members or the superintendent at this time? Seeing none, we have a motion for selection of candidate for MASB Board of Directors. Motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bonifield. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. Okay. The next item on our agenda is the second reading of Board Bylaw BCB, General Order of Business at Regular Meetings. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mrs. Bonifield.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Bylaws BCB, Board Operations General Order of Business at Regular Meetings.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you. As you know, in under this bylaw, the general order of business, it references the meeting agenda. And so the changes that were made were to move recognitions and other communication items as the initial matter under communications, and then following the district update from the superintendent, written communications in response to prior audience communications, and then followed by the audience communication. And the that suggestion was made at, I believe, one of our study sessions by a board member to have response to prior audience communication take place before audience communications in the event that it may address something that someone was planning to speak to the Board of Education. So although we have the ability to make those changes on the spot at any given meeting with the approval of the board, we thought that that may be something that in the general order of business that should be recognized in this bylaw.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions for board members at this time? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the second reading of Board Bylaw BCB, General Order of Business at Regular Meetings. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
And President Burton.
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is the first reading of Board Policy EDDB, Student Transportation, Walkers and Riders. We do not need a motion on this because we will not be voting on it tonight because it is a first reading and it requires both the first and second reading for a vote. But we will be hearing from Mr. Francis on this item.
Thank you, President Burton. Board Policy EDDB, which is Business Management, Student Transportation, Walkers and Riders. This was most recently updated in December of 2016, but in that effort to clarify where eligible students would be picked up and dropped off regarding their home address, that was updated at the time, but there continued to be some confusion and questions. So we have added another sentence to the policy to help specifically clarify the fact that bus pickup and drop off will be based upon the home address and within the neighborhood that the LPS Transportation Department has designated within the neighborhood. That should clarify specifically for folks, and I can answer any questions. I will read this as the first reading in its totality in the updated version. There's also a portion of EDDB that was removed, starting with student bus passes. That was the subheading and everything under. It really was not policy. It was really a process with regard to bus passes and should not be in a formal board policy. So that part was just removed in its entirety. So when you are ready, I can read through this for you.
Go right ahead.
All right. Business Management, Student Transportation, Walkers and Riders, EDDB. Bus transportation is a privilege and not a right and shall be administered in accordance with law. Eligibility for transportation is based on a student's home address. Bus pickup and drop-off is to and from the bus stop assigned based upon the student's home address unless otherwise determined by a student's individualized education program, IEP. Transportation shall be provided for secondary students living more than 1 1/2 miles from the school of designated attendance and elementary students living more than 1 mile from their school of designated attendance. Exceptions may be made for safety and health reasons of students.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or board members? Mrs. Oakley.
The only thing I would add is, for anyone listening, this is not a change in practice. This is really language clarifying the policy that has been in place for many years and currently exists and is being followed. But it really, we have found needed, it was something we referred back to, and as you know, one of Mr. Francis's responsibilities is to oversee transportation. And so enough questions had come up that's normally a signal to us. Boy, we better take a look at the language and see if we can make it a little bit clearer for a reader who's just going through it for the first time. So no change in practice or in policy other than to clarify the language.
Okay. Other comments or questions from board members?
There's one piece at the end as I read it, just to clarify since we're talking about it, the last sentence I read was exceptions may be made for safety and health reasons of students. That's not a general item. It's not something that is supposed to indicate just call up your principal or call up central office and ask for something. It really would be a medical. There's temporarily times where a student may have a broken a leg, et cetera, or it could be in totality an area that maybe doesn't have a sidewalk that the transportation department makes that exception, even though it's less than, let's say for as an example, a secondary student, less than 1.5 miles. So we've had those types of general exceptions as well. I just want folks to understand that there shouldn't be 100 phone calls to say, you know, my student should have an exception because we're really close to 1.5 or something like that. It really is something specific that's potentially medical or a general item that the department comes up with.
And the student bus passes, that is not being eliminated, it's just being moved to the administrative procedures and perhaps the student handbooks where it is more appropriately placed.
Yeah, it won't be an administrative procedure because it really falls into, like you said, more like the handbook and from the department itself.
Okay.
It just makes more sense because it's a process that they hold and carry out.
Okay, so there's not a change in the concept, just simply
Correct.
where it's most
Correct.
most appropriate to have it written. Okay. Any other comments or questions from board members? All right. We have, let's see here, this is a first reading, so Mrs. Bradford, would you please put this on our next, on for a second reading at our next voting meeting?
Sure.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is first reading of board policies, GAM, personnel, staff rights and responsibilities, GBE, personnel, conflict of interest, formerly BHA-2, and GBL, professional personnel tenure. And we'll turn that over. Hang on just a moment, please. And I believe it's Mr. Abate who's going to be addressing these items for us.
It is, thank you. So GM is pretty straightforward, staff rights and responsibilities. We simply just wanted to put in a little bit of clarification because we do have some contracts that are not part of our bargaining groups. And so we want to be certain that we've included every potential document that addresses staff rights and responsibilities. So the proposed revision would read, the rights and responsibilities of employees are covered in board policies, applicable master agreements, non-affiliated employee contracts, and/or appropriate laws.
Okay. And the only thing we've added there is the applicable master agreements as opposed to just master agreements. And we've added non-affiliated employee contracts, which we do have a small number of those.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions on this policy change? Okay. The next one?
All right, so the proposed new GBE, so the conflict of interest policy was initially in the board bylaws. It seems to make more sense as a matter of personnel, so we had proposed to move it into the personnel section. And there is a bit of a revision here looking to more specifically delineate what exactly we're talking about in the conflict of interest portion of this. And so the new policy revision would read, no Livonia Public Schools administrator shall be involved in the hiring, selection, direct supervision, or evaluation of a family member. Any family member of the aforementioned positions must disclose a familial relationship on his or her application to the district. The next part is unchanged, but I'll read it just for the record. As used in this section, a family member is defined as a person's spouse, spouse's sibling or child, a person's sibling or sibling spouse or child, a person's child or child spouse, a person's parent or parent spouse, and includes these relationships as created by adoption or marriage.
Alrighty. Are there comments or questions on this item? No. Alrighty. Seeing none, we'll go on to the next. Mr. Abate?
Yes, and GBL, tenure. So we previously had just a single line that suggested that the Board of Education actually grants tenure. We thought we should correct that so that it matches more appropriately to what we do here and the board's role in that. So the new language, proposed new language would read, the Board of Education will recognize the achievement of tenure status per the Michigan Teacher Tenure Act for all probationary teachers who have been recommended by district administration upon verification that they have successfully met all LPS standards, including years of service, effective evaluations, overall performance, and documentation of student growth.
So the key here is that the formerly written policy read that the Board of Education will grant tenure, which we do not grant tenure, but rather the new says that we will recognize the achievement of tenure.
Correct.
Are there any other comments or questions from the superintendent or members of the board? Alrighty. These will be put on the agenda. Mr. Johnson?
President Burton, may I go back?
Yes.
I just had a thought on the conflict of interest policy.
Yes.
It indicates that, if I go back here, any family member of the aforementioned positions must disclose a familial relationship on his or her application to the district. What do we do if a person does not do that and we later find out that they did indeed have a familial relationship?
I don't know that I've encountered that situation since I've been up here. I would imagine we would, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to speculate though, but
Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here.
sure. Did you have a thought on that, Ms. Oakwood?
Yeah, one of the things that we always do is there are many, many sections on the application, and one of the things that we do address is if there are any areas of the application that were not accurately completed. So depending on which section that may have been, we would address that at that time. So really, there are, as you know, many areas on the application to complete. There are also many yes or no questions to affirm the statements that are included. When that does, if there is something related to that, whether that was either a lack of clarity on the applicant's part or whether it was simply something that was not completed, that would be a follow-up from our human resources directors.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on any of these three items? All right. These will all then go on the agenda for next month's voting meeting. Mrs. Bradford, could you note that?
I sure can.
Thank you. The last item on our agenda is hearing from board members. Are there board members who have any thoughts that they would like to share at this time? No? Seeing none, what looked like a rather lengthy agenda, we clipped through pretty quickly. We do, again, want to congratulate our principals on their recognition with Principals Week. We are so grateful for all the work that all of our staff does, but principals do hold a unique position. And again, congratulations to Laura Ulasik as the new director of the Livonia Education Foundation. A lot of things to celebrate in the district, so if you're looking for something fun to do, definitely check into some of our performing arts and our athletics in the evenings, and you go and support a lot of our students and our staff in Livonia Public Schools. Thank you so much for sticking with us this evening, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your evening. We are now adjourned.